All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and of course, critical thinking over magical thinking. I am your host, Leanne Lord. I am a stand-up comedian, author, Center for Inquiry Fellow, and fellow Earth Dweller. Welcome aboard, everyone. It is fortuitous that today, May 2nd, is the National Day of Reason. Clearly, the nation didn't get the memo, but if you're here, then you did, and we will work with that. Thank you for joining us, all of you who are with us right now in real time, who have the opportunity to ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box, as well as we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can. And welcome to those of you who are watching the recording. And while I have all of you, please be sure to check out the latest episode of Point of Inquiry, available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, please round out your reading list with Skeptical Inquirer magazine. You can subscribe to it at skepticalinquirer.org. Oh, also, the registration is open for SciCon 2024. Woohoo! Las Vegas, October 24th through the 27th. And now, tonight's topic is the science of weird shit. Oh, how I love a well-placed expletive. In fact, our guest tonight is the author of Weird Shit and Why Our Minds Conjure the Paranormal. That's actually a great question, especially since I had a dream about tonight's episode, which must be a sign that I'm influencing real-world events with the power of my mind. No? No. But our guest will be giving us an overview of anomalistic, and I'm struggling with that word because I want to say animalistic. I know it's anomalistic psychology. And anomalistic psychology attempts to address believers by proposing alternative, non-paranormal explanations for what seem to be paranormal experiences. He'll also discuss some rather humbling key factors, such as the unreliability of memory, hallucinatory experiences, and a range of cognitive biases that we all suffer from. Our guest is Emeritus Professor of Psychology at Goldsmiths University of London. For more than 2 decades, he headed the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit. He's a fellow of the British Psychological Society and of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Currently, his main area of research is the psychology of paranormal beliefs and anomalous experiences. In fact, there's an interview with him in the latest, here we go, Skeptical Inquirer, hello, on weird stuff and why weird stuff matters. But more importantly, he's an Aries, and we all know what that means. Nothing. So please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents screen, Professor Chris French. Professor, sir, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Well, I would like to share my screen with you for this presentation. There we go. And off we go. Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk in your series. And thank you very much for all of those people who have actually tuned in to listen to the presentation. In particular, thanks to those people in the UK who have tuned in to listen, because over here it's midnight, so I'm sure they're as tired as I am. Anyway, yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time, Leanne, that I have been introduced as an animalistic psychologist, so yeah, there you go. Right, one of the main kind of motivations for doing the talk and for doing as many talks as possible at the moment is, yes, I have a book to sell. And here it is, The Science of Weird Shit from MIT Press with a foreword by my good friend Richard Wiseman, who I'm sure is familiar to you all. And we'll just dive straight in. I will be doing a talk at SciCon. The talk I'm doing at SciCon talks about one strand of the research that we do, or that we have done over the past few decades. I'll start off by just giving you a very wordy definition of what actually anomalistic psychology is. For a long time, I wanted to do a popular science book on anomalistic psychology, and I found the day job just was getting in the way. I just could not find the time. Anyway, I retired a few years back, finally had the time, and now the book is here. So, anomalistic psychology may be defined as the study of extraordinary phenomena of behavior and experience, including, but not restricted to, those which are often labeled paranormal. It's directed towards understanding bizarre experiences that many people have without assuming a priori that there is anything paranormal involved. It entails attempting to explain paranormal and related beliefs and ostensibly paranormal experiences in terms of known or knowable psychological and physical factors. And basically, that is what I'm going to be talking about this evening. I'm going to give you some various examples of the kinds of explanations we've come up with and the kind of evidence that we've come up with that we hope supports those explanations. The other strand of research, the thing I'll be talking about at PsyCon, is our attempts to directly test paranormal claims. As you can see from this definition, anomalistic psychology is kind of skeptical in its approach. It adopts as a working hypothesis the idea that let's assume that paranormal forces don't exist. Can we explain the weird experiences that people have? Everything from alien abduction claims to people who think they've had a ghostly encounter to people who say they have psychic powers. Can we explain all of those things without invoking the possibility of paranormal forces? See how far we can take that idea. But there is an important part of skepticism for me is to always be open to the possibility that you might be wrong. New evidence might come along that makes you change your mind. And so in that vein, we also had this lesser strand of research where we would directly test paranormal claims. And we put considerable time and effort into that. That's what I'll be talking about at PsyCon. But for this evening, I'm going to be talking about the more skeptical approach of, can we come up with non-paranormal explanations? So let's dive straight in. Oh, well, before we do that, just one more preliminary comment. I still sometimes get a kind of attitude from fellow psychologists in particular. Scientists generally are very skeptical regarding paranormal claims. Psychologists are very, very skeptical regarding paranormal claims. And so sometimes you'll get this kind of attitude of, why are you studying this stuff? Why are you interested in it? I mean, we all know people aren't being abducted by aliens. We know that ghosts don't exist. We know that people don't have psychic ability. Why are you so fascinated with this stuff? Well, there's a couple of answers to that. One is that I don't think that's a genuinely open-minded scientific attitude. Although I would agree with the people who say that those things don't exist, I don't think we can say we know they don't exist. New evidence might come along that makes us change our mind. And for me, a really important part of skepticism is to always be open to the possibility that you might be wrong. New evidence might make you revise your opinions. And that's a good thing when that happens. That's what, for me, that's at the heart of science, the ability to revise your theories, your hypotheses in the light of evidence. But secondly, and maybe more importantly for a psychologist, most people, regardless of the era, regardless of the geographical location, that in all of these different societies, we find people who report these experiences and these beliefs. So there's something there that needs to be explained from a psychological point of view. Either that indicates that paranormal forces really do exist, and if they do, then science in general should get over its prejudices and just study those forces the way we study any other part of the natural world, or it's telling us something really important about human psychology. So either way, it's worth taking seriously and trying to get the bottom of, well, what is going on when people have these experiences? Okay, now one of the themes that runs through anomalistic psychology is the theme of cognitive biases. Our cognitive systems are amazing. Every second of your waking life, you are taking in information, you're processing that information, you've got a mental model of the world around you in terms of taking in visual information, you can hopefully, you are understanding the words that I'm speaking now. There's so many different aspects to it: reasoning, interpretation, memory, all of those things. They're incredible, they're amazing. However, we do know that the human cognitive system does suffer from certain cognitive biases. There are certain biases that we all share that maybe have some relevance to explaining why sometimes people think that they've had a paranormal experience where maybe there is another more plausible explanation. Now, just to give you one example, we are all really, really lousy when it comes to probability estimation. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because very often the obvious skeptical counter explanation to a paranormal claim is maybe it was just a coincidence. So someone has a dream, and then a few days later, something happens in their real life that seems to bear an uncanny correspondence to the dream. Was the dream some kind of psychic glimpse into the future? Or was the correspondence just a coincidence? Or, particularly back in the days before we all had iPhones that flashed up the names of the person who was calling us, there'd be people who would say, I know who's calling me on the phone, even if I wasn't expecting a call from that person. When the phone rings, I know who it is. Telephone telepathy. So is that real? Is there some kind of evidence there for a psychic connection? Or again, is it just coincidental? Now, most people don't like coincidence as an explanation. And I can see why. On the one hand, if you're the person it happens to, it has an emotional impact. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, if you're the person who experiences this amazing coincidence, it's something you tell your friends about. You know, you won't believe what happened to me, and you'll tell them the story. You may, though, be going beyond that emotional appeal that being the person who's had the experience has. You may, in certain circumstances, be able to come up with a reasonable guesstimate of what the probabilities were. And it might actually be that the chances of that particular event happening just after you'd had that dream were literally millions and millions to one. So how can that be just a coincidence? Surely not. Well, no. Well, actually, if you think about it, you'll realize, yes, coincidence must account for an awful lot of those kinds of experiences. There are over 8 billion of us on the planet. And even if we make the rather conservative assumption that we remember one dream per night, then that's 8 billion plus opportunities every single night for somebody to have a dream that then corresponds to a future event. In some cases, a very, very unlikely future event. We're not surprised when people win lotteries. I mean, the chances of winning the UK National Lottery, I believe, are 1 in 45 million. But nobody's surprised when people win, because we all intuitively accept that, well, so many people play the lottery, it's bound to happen that some people are going to get the numbers that correspond to the jackpot. And yet when it comes to something like an apparently precognitive dream, we don't seem to apply that same kind of reasoning. And instead, the question we ask ourselves is, what are the chances that I would have had that dream and then that event would have happened? That's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, what is the chances that anybody anywhere in the world would have had a dream with that degree of unlikelihood of apparently coming true? And then we realize that, yes, it's bound to happen. It just so happens that on this occasion, it was you that it happened to. And the same kind of thing with telephone telepathy. How many names go through your head in a day, and either the phone doesn't ring or the phone rings and it's somebody else? Well, that's a non-event. You don't even notice it. But the phone rings, it's the person you were just thinking of. And especially if it was somebody that you weren't expecting a call from and you haven't heard from a long time, whoa, spooky. Well, no, it isn't. It's the law, what mathematicians call the law of truly large numbers. If those things didn't ever happen, that would be spooky. That would take some explaining. The fact that they do happen is exactly what we'd expect. Okay, now it turns out that people who believe in the paranormal, the evidence is mixed on this. The findings are mixed. People have applied various, got people to kind of done various probability estimation questions. And I say we're all very bad at it, But it turns out that the believers in the paranormal, when you find a significant difference, which doesn't always happen, but when you do, they are worse than the skeptics. This is an example, this illustration here, of a very famous probability estimation problem that psychologists are fond of, called the birthday problem. If you have a number of people randomly selected at a party, it would be a really awful party, by the way, if you just randomly selected them, because they wouldn't know each other, they'd have nothing in common. But anyway, suppose you went ahead and did it. How many people would you need to have at your party to have a 50-50 chance that you've got at least one pair there with the same birthday? Well, if you think about it, if you just got two people at your party, because you haven't got very many friends, you've got one chance in 365. We'll ignore leap years to keep it simple. One chance in 365 that they will share the same birthday. If you have 366 people at your party, then you are absolutely certain that you must have at least one pair with the same birthday, because if by some strange fluke the first 365 all had different birthdays, you have used up all the dates of the year. The next person must match someone, so you're absolutely certain. So there's a number between 2 and 365 where you've got a 50-50 chance of having at least one pair with the same birthday. Now, if you actually give people that problem, they'll typically say, oh, 180, 200, 120. The actual answer is just 23. And that strikes most people as being far too low, but that is actually the correct answer. Okay, there's a little interactive bit here for you all at home there. Some words: bed, snore, dream, doze, pillow, snooze, blanket, night. Okay, that was fun. Right, one of the things we've got very, very interested in at the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit is memory. And the reason for that is that most of the time when you are dealing with someone's claim to have had a paranormal experience, you are dealing with their report of the claim, not the actual event itself. And so that raises the whole question, well, how reliable is eyewitness testimony? I'm sure you're all very aware of the fact there have been thousands, literally thousands of studies that have done things like show people videos of staged crimes and then got them to report back what they've seen. And people can be notoriously unreliable in terms of their eyewitness testimony. What might be slightly more surprising is that even memory for very simple stimuli, things that you will have seen literally thousands of times in your life, can also be unreliable. So, for example, how is the 4 represented on clocks and watches with Roman numerals on them? Is it like this clock here on the left, I, or is it like this clock here on the right, IV? Now, if I do this talk with an audience in front of me, I can get them to raise their hands. I can't do that with you guys tonight, but I'm pretty damn certain that a lot more people will have said it's IV than it's I. And those people would be wrong, because on clocks and watches, but only on clocks and watches, the 4 in Roman numerals is typically represented in this rather unusual way of I. There are a few exceptions to it, but very few. Now, what this is a simple demonstration of the fact that memory does not work like a video camera. You couldn't think back to the last time you saw a clock or a watch with Roman numerals on them and zoom in on the 4 and then answer the question. Instead, you answer the question in terms of what you think you must have seen, not what you actually did see. And what you think you must have seen, well, how is 4 represented in Roman numerals? It's IV. And yes, it generally is, but not on clocks and watches for some bizarre reason. It's an example of a kind of top-down influence on memory. We answer the question in terms of what we think we must have seen rather than what we actually did see. And these top-down influences can influence not only memory, but also perception. And that means that our beliefs, our expectations about the way the world works will influence how we perceive things, how we interpret things. All right, now I'm going to give you a little task to do here. I'm going to, in a second, start this little animation, and you'll see the white letters and the black letters will bounce around the screen. I want you to just count the number of times that they hit the edge of the screen. The white letters, just the white letters, ignore the black letters. Okay. Now, I'm not sure what answer you came up with, because again, I'm doing this in front of a live audience. I can actually ask them. In this case, I can't, but the more important question, rather than how many times the white letters hit the edge of the screen, was, did you notice anything else there happening in addition to the letters? And I am pretty certain that a lot of you will not have noticed the fact that a red cross moved very slowly from the right-hand side of the screen across the left-hand side of the screen and then disappeared. Now, the reason I'm showing you that particular simple task is I'm not going to show it to you again. It's conceptually very similar to a classic study by Simons and Chabris in 1999, in which they demonstrated the phenomenon of inattentional blindness. What they did, rather than using letters and a red cross, they showed a video of some people with white shirts on, some people with black shirts on, throwing the ball around to each other. And the task was to count the number of times that the people in the white shirts threw the ball to each other, ignore the people in the black shirts. And halfway through this demonstration, a gorilla, which you can see there in the picture, walks through. Well, it's not really a gorilla, it's someone in a gorilla suit, stands there, beats their chest, and then walks off. Now, if you say to people, do you think that if you'd been given this task to do, you would notice the gorilla? Almost everyone will say, yes, of course I would. It's so odd. It's so incongruous. It's bound to grab my attention. But the surprising result from Simons and Chabris's study, which is a great title, by the way, Gorillas in Our Midst. I absolutely love that. But the surprising result from their study was that about half the people didn't notice the gorilla. And this is the phenomenon of inattentional blindness. And it's a really important psychological phenomenon insofar as a lot of fatal accidents are caused by inattentional blindness. And it's another very, very dramatic demonstration of the fact that eyewitness testimony can be notoriously unreliable. If you do not see the gorilla or the red cross in our version of the task, then it's not encoded. It's not there to be retrieved from memory. If you don't encode something while it's happening, it's not there in your memory to be retrieved. Now, my wife, Anne Richards, is also a psychologist, and like me, she's retired, I should say, recently. But she did a lot of research on inattentional blindness, and she called me one day to say, did I have a pencil and paper measure of the personality variable of absorption? Now, if you score highly on a measure of absorption, you are the kind of person who, if you are reading a novel or watching a film or even doing a crossword puzzle, you completely shut off the outside world. And intuitively, it sounds like people who score high on absorption ought to be more susceptible to inattentional blindness than people who don't. And as I say, she was interested in getting a copy of this scale for some research she was doing. I was intrigued because I knew from my wider reading that absorption correlates with the tendency to report paranormal experiences and with paranormal belief in general. And so we thought, well, let's look at everything. Let's look at all of those things in a single study. So we used the letter task that I've just showed you. We didn't use the gorilla task. We used the letter task. And we found, as we had predicted, that the people who were inattentionally blind, the ones who didn't see the red cross as it went across the background, scored higher on our measure of absorption, and also scored higher on our measure of paranormal belief and the tendency to report paranormal experiences. Now, again, it's interesting on the one hand, just as a kind of yet another demonstration of the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, but also it raises the possibility that maybe, not in all cases, but in some cases, when people report some apparently paranormal experience, maybe there was some very mundane explanation if they just noticed something in their environment at the time when it was taking place. So just to give you a hypothetical example, supposing you have someone who says that they were in a room, they were all on their own, and while they weren't looking, a book mysteriously moved from one side of the room to the other. Now, okay, maybe it was a genuinely paranormal phenomenon, but alternatively, maybe somebody else was in the room with you and you just didn't notice them. Now, if you suggested that, they would say, no, of course I'd have seen them. If anybody else in the room, I'd definitely seen them. Well, would you? I mean, people don't see a gorilla. So maybe sometimes there are much more mundane explanations for these things. Another memory-related phenomenon that we're interested in was something called the memory conformity effect. And I'll talk about that. I'll describe what that is in a second. But for now, I assume that probably most of you recognize this person in the picture. Yes, indeed, it's Uri Geller. Uri Geller appeared on the scene in the UK back in the 1970s. And at that point, I was a believer in a lot of paranormal stuff. And when Geller appeared, I was very excited. Because here was somebody who claimed he had these amazing psychic abilities. He claimed he could read minds, he could divine the contents of sealed envelopes, and all sorts of other stuff. But the thing that really seemed to catch the public imagination, and the thing which really caught the media's attention, was he claimed that just by gently stroking metal, spoons, forks, keys, he could make it bend. This was obviously a really stunning psychokinetic effect, if genuine. Now, I now have a lot of friends who are conjurers, and they can do this trick. They can make it look like they gently stroke a spoon or a fork and it just whoop, bends right before your very eyes. And they say it's a trick. It does not involve paranormal powers. And if Uri's doing it using psychic powers, well, he's doing it the hard way, because it looks exactly the same when you do it as a trick. And of course, it's important to note that Geller was never able to demonstrate this ability under properly controlled conditions. But some people would object when you said it's just sleight of hand, it's just a magician's trick. They'd say it can't be, because I've seen Geller do it. And when he had bent the spoon or the fork or the key or whatever it was, he put it down on a table and it carried on bending when he wasn't even touching it. How do you explain that, you smart-ass skeptic? And now, if that was really happening, that would take some explaining. However, my good friend Richard Wiseman did a study with Emma Greening. Richard is not only a very well-known and very skeptical psychologist, he's also a member of the inner magic circle. Not just the magic circle, the inner magic circle. He knows an awful lot about magic and mentalism. And Richard assumed that what was going on here was just down to the power of suggestion. But rather than just assert that, he carried out an experiment to show that. And the experiment was very, very simple, but very lovely results. What he did was to show a video of an alleged psychic, who was in fact a conjurer using sleight of hand, doing a spot of psychokinetic metal bending. And the important bit comes after he's bent the key using sleight of hand. He puts it down on the table and he says, if you look closely, you'll see it's still bending. There's another condition where the participants get exactly the same video, but they don't hear that verbal suggestion. Of those who do hear the verbal suggestion, 40% of them report that they think the key carries on bending. Of those who don't get the suggestion, virtually nobody does. So it's a really big effect with a really simple manipulation. And Richard demonstrated that in 2 studies. Anyway, we wanted to look at something called the memory conformity effect. Now, the memory conformity effect refers to the fact that, well, first off, let me just say, if you have a single eyewitness to an event, and it's an uncorroborated account that they give, you wouldn't give that as much evidential weight as if you've got multiple witnesses and they're all giving a very, very similar account. And that's probably a very sensible thing to do. But one thing to bear in mind is that when people witness something unusual, whether it be a crime or a possible sighting of a UFO or the Loch Ness Monster or a ghost, then they're going to discuss it with each other. And it's possible that one person's account can influence another person's memory. So that they end up genuinely giving what they think is a sincere account, but it's been influenced by somebody else. And if that first somebody else had made some errors in terms of their account, then they will be incorporated in the second person's account and so on. So anyway, this is what we wanted to look at. So what we did, this is myself and Chrissy Wilson, we borrowed Richard's video. We used that in our study, but rather than just having people watching the video alone, we had them watch it in pairs. And the idea was you watch this video in pairs, then you discuss what you've seen, and then you report back to us independently what you have seen. And the thing is that the genuine participants in the study didn't know that the other person in the study was a confederate, a stooge working with us. And the stooge was instructed to either say the key had carried on bending or the key hadn't carried on bending. Those people who were in the condition where they got the suggestion from the psychic, then reinforced by the co-witness, we got up to levels of 60% of people reporting that they thought the key carried on bending. It absolutely doesn't, by the way. So it's not just what happens when you witness an event that's important in influencing your memory, it's what happens afterwards as well. Okay, so again, that was an interesting result. Okay, you knew this bit was coming. And now, normally, again, if I was doing this talk in front of a live audience, I'd get them to just put their hands up, but you can just do it in your own heads. Which of these words were presented earlier? You knew this bit was coming. Okay, did I present the word snore? Yes, I did. Chair? No. Pillow? Yep. Dream? Night? Yeah. Sleep? Now, there will have been some people out there who said, oh, yeah, you presented the word sleep. Well, I didn't. Aha. It's a very trivial example, very trivial indeed, of a false memory. You misremembered a word on a list. The point being here that all of the words that I did present you with were closely associated with the word sleep, but the word sleep itself was not actually presented. So as I said, it's a very trivial example of a false memory. But these days, psychologists who are interested in false memories have techniques that can pretty reliably implant false memories for entire episodes, things that never happened at all. Won't work on everybody, but it will work on a sizable minority of volunteer participants. So these include things like getting lost in a shopping mall at the age of 5, being very upset and then being reunited with your parents, or being attacked by a wild animal like a dog or whatever, or spilling a punch bowl over on the parents of the bride at a wedding reception, or really interestingly, a study that showed that people could be convinced in terms of actually saying initially this didn't happen, but eventually, yes, I can now remember that they were involved in a serious crime which had police involvement and they were the perpetrators. So, it's quite worrying, really, where this could all lead. But anyway, it does show that false memories, yes, they can be reliably produced under properly controlled conditions. And really, we maybe shouldn't have as much faith in our memories as we often do seem to have. Now, we've now got to the point where we can actually ask the question, are some people more prone, more susceptible to false memories than others? And it turns out that, yes, they are. There's a number of personality dimensions that correlate with susceptibility to false memories. They include things like dissociativity. If you're the kind of person who would score highly on a measure of dissociativity, rather than give you a technical definition, because it's a very, very vague, woolly concept anyway, but if you were the kind of person who would score highly on such a measure, you would be the kind of person that my grandma would have described as being away with the fairies. So I think, yeah, that sums it up really. People who are very highly fantasy prone, again, correlates with dissociativity. Absorption, I've already talked about. Hypnotic susceptibility, are you a good hypnotic subject? All of those things intercorrelate with each other. They also correlate with susceptibility to false memories. What really interested me is that they also correlate with paranormal belief and the tendency to report paranormal experiences. And this raises the possibility that some of the experiences that people are reporting as being paranormal, maybe they didn't actually happen at all. Maybe they're entirely false memories. Anyway, we wanted to do a study to kind of probe a little bit deeper into that idea. This was again with Chrissy Wilson. And so we carried out a study where we asked people about their memories for dramatic news footage. Now, I'm sure that many people looking at that picture will know exactly what it's of. It's of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers. And typically, if you were to ask people, where were you, who were you with, what were you doing when you first saw that dramatic news footage, they would be very confident about their answer. They'd be very sure that this was a really, it's what we call a flashbulb memory. It's as if the event was so dramatic that the memory is kind of burned into your memory cells. Now, for a long time, psychologists thought that flashbulb memories really were very special. They're much more kind of accurate and long-lasting than other memories. We now know that, in fact, even flashbulb memories can become distorted. They're not as reliable as we once thought they were. They are more reliable than other kinds of memories, but not totally reliable. Anyway, it looked like we were doing a study of flashbulb memories. We gave people what we called our news coverage questionnaire, where we had examples of dramatic pieces of news footage. And we said to people, we want you to tell us where you were, who you were with, what were you doing when you saw these pieces of dramatic news footage. Not when you heard the news, when you saw the footage. And we were being a bit tricksy because we included in one item that although it was something that had actually happened, it hadn't been caught on camera. It was a terrorist bomb going off in a Bali nightclub. And what we found, in line with similar research by other people, was that of our 100 respondents, 36 of them reported that they could remember this non-existent footage. So it's a false memory. They could tell us whether it was in color or black and white. They could tell us whether there was a commentary to go with it. They could comment on the quality of the image, quality of the video footage. And those people scored higher on paranormal belief and experience, which is the main hypothesis we were testing. Now, one of my favorite examples of what I assume is a false memory, could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is memories of alien contact and alien abduction. And we reported a study back in 2008 where we compared a group of experiencers, that's the politically correct term, people who had conscious memories of contact with aliens with a well-controlled, a well-matched, I should say, a well-matched comparison group. That included my mum, who, as far as we know, was never abducted by aliens. And what we found was that our sample of experiencers scored higher on measures of things like dissociativity, absorption, tendency to hallucinate, and there are a whole range of other things that fit the profile of people who are highly susceptible to false memories. They also, interestingly, scored higher on the incidence of sleep paralysis. Now, I'll come back to that in a second and say a bit more about that. This is a typical report of being abducted by aliens. This is from an article written for The New Scientist by Susan Blackmore back in the mid-90s. It's a composite. It's basically, it's kind of based on a lot of interviews she'd done, a lot of accounts she'd read, and so on and so forth. So I woke up in the middle of the night and everything looked odd and strangely lit. At the end of my bed was a 4 feet high grey alien. Its spindly, thin body supported a huge head with 2 enormous, slanted, liquid black eyes. It compelled me telepathically to follow and led me into a spaceship, along curved corridors to an examination room full of tables on which people lay. And there they are, the little critters. They're referred to as greys. They've got big heads, big eyes, telepathic communication, and they're about to put that probe somewhere. Interesting. She goes on, I was forced to lie down while they painfully examined me, extracted ova, or in the case of men, sperm, and implanted something in my nose. I could see jars containing half-human, half-alien fetuses and a nursery full of silent, sickly children. When I eventually found myself back in bed, several hours had gone by. And nobody knows what these implants are for. Some people think they're mind control devices. Some people think they're just tracking devices. Here they are putting the implants in. I should say, by the way, these are drawings. They're not photographs. Okay, just to be clear about that. I mentioned sleep paralysis earlier. Sleep paralysis is an incredibly fascinating topic in its own right. It's something we've published a lot of papers on. And there'll be a lot of people listening tonight who've had sleep paralysis. In its most basic form, it's just a temporary period of paralysis that occurs between sleep and wakefulness. And basically, if you ever experience it, it's a bit disconcerting, but that's about it. You kind of think, that was a bit weird, and get on with your day. Around 8% of the general population report having this experience at least once in their lives. There are a couple of groups that have a much higher incidence, almost 30%, in psychiatric patients and students. And this does actually make sense, because if you've got the underlying susceptibility, you're much more likely to have an attack of sleep paralysis if your sleep pattern is disrupted. And 2 groups with notoriously poor sleep patterns: psychiatric patients and students, hopefully for different reasons. But there can be associated symptoms that can make it absolutely terrifying. And they include things like feeling of a strong sense of presence. There's something or someone in the room with you, and whatever it is, they have evil intentions towards you, even if you can't see or hear anything. But actually, you might be able to see and hear stuff. You might hallucinate. There might be auditory hallucinations of footsteps or voices or mechanical sounds. Or there might be visual hallucinations of lights moving around the room, or dark shadows, or monstrous figures, old hags, demons, or tactile hallucinations. You might feel something breathing on the back of your neck. And bear in mind, you can open your eyes, you can see your bedrooms, one of the few parts of your body you can move, but you can't move. Absolutely terrifying. Also, difficulty breathing. People often report they feel got pressure on the chest or something trying to throttle them, and intense fear. Now, if ever you talk about sleep paralysis, you are contractually obliged to show this picture. It's by Henry Fuseli. It's called The Nightmare. It's a beautiful depiction of sleep paralysis. You've got this weird horse peering through the drapes. You've got the demon on the chest, so you've got the pressure on the chest there. And interestingly, if you do have the underlying susceptibility to sleep paralysis, you're much more likely to actually have an attack, an episode, if you sleep in your back than any other position. But to be honest, she's just asking for trouble sleeping in that position. And 10 years later, she has learned nothing. She's still in the same position. Anyway, one of the things that really fascinates me is the way that the same core phenomenon is interpreted across different cultures and different societies. So in Newfoundland, they talk about the old hag who comes and sits astride the sleeper and attempts to throttle them. In Japan, it's kanashibari, which literally translates as bound by iron. In St. Lucius, one of my favorites because it's so creepy, they interpret it as kokmar. It's the spirits of unbaptized children that crawl onto the sleeper's chest and throttle them. Back in the Middle Ages in Europe, it was interpreted as being sex-crazed demons who would come and have their wicked way with you while you were asleep. The male version was the incubus, and the female version was the succubus. I mean, to be honest, I don't know which of the 2 of them is the more shocked there. It's hard to say. How do you get from an episode of sleep paralysis to think you've been abducted by aliens? I mean, there's often no sign of the aliens in the original experience. However, if you're one of the very small percentage of people who have the very vivid form of sleep paralysis on a regular basis, you may well end up thinking, well, either something weird is really happening to me or I'm going crazy. And you marginally prefer the idea that something real is happening. And if you then read the UFO literature, it's widely believed amongst ufologists that the aliens, when they abduct you, can wipe your memory for most of the experience. But there might be a few telltale signs. These telltale signs include things like waking up paralyzed with a strong sense of breath. In other words, they're describing the symptoms of sleep paralysis, but they are taking them as being evidence that you've been abducted by aliens. But if you're one of the people who've been having these experiences, at last you've got an explanation and you're not going crazy. So now the task is to retrieve the memories. So what do? You go for hypnotic regression in the mistaken belief that hypnosis is some kind of magical key to unlock repressed or hidden memories. It is absolutely not. It provides a context in which you basically form false memories based on fantasy, imagination, prior knowledge, expectations, things you've seen in films, all sorts of other factors come in. And then these memories feel very real, and the narratives are then believed to be true memories. And it's important to notice that it's the same techniques that are used, whether we're talking about retrieving memories of alleged alien abduction or past life regression or ritualized satanic abuse. It's the same techniques. We should all be taken with a very, very big pinch of salt. They're all false memories. Okay, the last point I want to make, which again is another theme that runs through anomalistic psychology. I've mentioned it already once with respect to memory, but the importance of what we call top-down processing. When we interact with the world around us, we have two forms of information. We've got the information coming from our senses, which is sometimes referred to as bottom-up processing, but sometimes that information can be inherently ambiguous or degraded. And we also make use of top-down processing, what we already know, what we believe, what we expect about the way the world works. And you've got this constant interaction between the top-down processes. So we use this to build up a mental model of the world and our place in it. And this model is constantly updated on the basis of new incoming sensory information. Now, what that means is that sometimes the top-down influences will be very strong, especially when the input is inherently ambiguous or degraded. And one demonstration of this is something called pareidolia, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, type of illusion or misperception involving a vague or obscure stimulus being perceived as something clear and distinct. And one of the things that we very often see is faces. So here's a few fairly light-hearted examples. One of my favorites, which many of you will know already, Nunor bun, the Immaculate Confection. This is a cinnamon bun. I think it was in a New York deli. Anyway, some people think it bears an uncanny resemblance to Mother Teresa. If you can't actually make it out there, there's a nice little animation to help you. This is a more recent example of somebody who had a grilled cheese sandwich, took a bite from it and thought they could see the Madonna looking back at them, put it on their bedside cabinet for 10 years and then sold it on eBay for $28,000. I believe it is now in a casino in Vegas. I might come and try and find it when I go over for the conference. It's what she would have wanted, let's face it. Now the most powerful example, and this is what I'll finish with, even though many of you will already be familiar with it, but I just love it anyway, so I'm going to show it to you again. Most powerful example of top-down processing refers to the auditory modality, and it's the claim that there are satanic messages in rock music, but you can only hear them when you play the record backwards. Very, very much Christian fundamentalists in America that we have to thank for this one, so thanks, guys. There has to be, most of the stuff you'll find, if you go to the websites, which I often do, and you can play on these clips. And the thing that you notice is that you don't actually know what the message is until someone tells you, or you read it for yourself. And then you kind of play it again and think, oh yeah, I can kind of hear that. There has to be a kind of a top of the satanic pops. And in my humble opinion, it's Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. So here it is forwards. If there's a person in your head, don't be alone there. It's just desperately for the bakery. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the roads for you. I hope you all got that clearly. Now I'm now going to play it backwards. And for those of you that haven't heard it before, your challenge is, what is the satanic message? And my prediction is that most of you will just hear backwards gobbledygook. There's a very good reason for that. It's because it is backwards gobbledygook. One or two of you will pick up one or two words, but we'll comment on that later. I'll then play it again, having told you what the message is. And the second time I play it, it will sound completely different. And you will hear the message as clear as a bell. And you'll wonder how you missed it the first time. The reason you missed it the first time is because it isn't there. Okay. So here it is backwards. I say, my prediction is that most of you will have heard backwards gobbledygook. One or two of you will have heard the word Satan occasionally. And again, it's top-down processing. What's the word you're most likely to hear when you're listening for satanic messages? But according to people who believe this nonsense, this is the full message. I'm now going to play it again, and this time you will hear that full message as clear as a bell. I never tire of that. Anyway, I'm going to draw things to a close. So thank you very much for listening. My book is available. Please do buy it, and I'll happily sign it for you when I come over to Vegas for the PsyCon conference. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you so much for that presentation. You can, yes, thank you. You can
stop sharing. Okay.
Stop sharing, but thank you for sharing. That Stairway to Heaven never not shocks me. Like,
it's great.
It's gobbledygook. It's absolutely, and then I see the words, and my head is putting in the words. Like, yeah, that's exactly what that means. Like, that's how you get people. I will say, and on your grilled cheese picture, I didn't see the Madonna. I saw Janet Jackson.
No.
It's the hair, clearly. How do you not see Janet Jackson in the grilled cheese sandwich? Oh my gosh. But I learned so much. I mean, clearly telephone telepathy was killed by call waiting. And I misunderstood. I thought the birthday problem was the fact that the older you get, they keep coming faster and faster. That's a different birthday problem. And I will go on record saying I was never impressed. I'm a little too young for it, but when I learned about Uri Geller, I was not impressed at all. What would have been more impressive to me was that if he had washed the spoons and put them away. I think that's if you ask his partners, they would have went, yes, put away the damn spoons, Yuri. Don't leave them everywhere. And yeah, thank you. And for people that have, I actually do have sleep paralysis, and I learned two things. One, I have a cat who likes to sleep right here. So that's my issue. And if you think you're abducted by aliens, stop falling asleep watching Star Wars is my prescription, everybody. But we have got some really good questions here, and I'm going to start right at the top. If you don't mind, with Betsy. Betsy Stark wanted to know, how can anyone study private experiences, things that happen to people in the middle of the night or in remote areas where people have, sleepy memories and poor quality pictures? How is this even possible? I guess that's why we have TV shows.
It's a very good question. I mean, because obviously you've got a situation where we're trying to explain experiences that do often occur under very uncontrolled conditions. Is there a way that we can actually kind of get some kind of handle on that? Let's take sleep paralysis as an example. We can actually, I say we, I mean people, Japanese researchers in particular, have actually found a way to induce sleep paralysis episodes in the sleep laboratory. So this is happening when people are all kind of wired up, we're measuring brain waves, we're measuring breathing rate, we're measuring everything. And you can actually induce sleep paralysis in people who have the underlying susceptibility by whenever they go, we know that sleep paralysis is something that occurs during the REM stage of sleep, the rapid eye movement stage of sleep. And during REM sleep, your muscles are actually paralyzed. Now, if you get people into the sleep lab, and in a normal night's sleep, you go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, then go back up to other stages, and then you go into REM. If you wake people up every time they go into REM, then eventually you get what's called a REM rebound effect, and people just go straight into REM rather than the other stages first. And those are the kind of situations that are typically associated with episodes of sleep paralysis. So we can actually induce it in the laboratory. Now, we can't necessarily do that for other weird experiences that people have, but we can try to kind of come up with some more well-controlled kind of simulation of it. And the fact, again, most of our anomalistic psychology research is on things like the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, the effects of suggestibility, false memories, hallucinatory experiences, all that kind of stuff. And I think if you can show that these things really are powerful and they can have an effect on what people genuinely think they've experienced, you're going some way towards explaining those things.
Thank you for that. That leads right into Kenneth's question. Hello, by the way, he says, Professor French. When someone shares an experience with him, claiming to have had a paranormal experience, such as witnessing an apparition, when he tries to offer possible explanations, what he often gets is, "But I know what I saw." How do you respond to that?
It's a really difficult one because for most people, again, that's one of the underlying one of the themes that runs through anomalistic psychology is obviously the need for critical thinking, and that is all about, well, why are some forms of evidence better, more trustworthy than others? And for most people, the most trustworthy form of evidence they have is personal experience. You hear skeptics saying this, and I cringe when they say it, but you hear skeptics saying, well, I don't believe in ghosts, I've never seen one. No, that's wrong. You could certainly have an experience where you think you have seen a ghost, but it doesn't mean you really have. And so it's when you are actually kind of dealing with people who are claiming that they've had this "I know what I saw" attitude, I actually there's a very popular podcast radio program called Uncanny, and one of the themes of Uncanny, it's all kind of people telling their own ghostly encounters, and one of the kind of mottos of Uncanny is "I know what I saw," and I've often been invited on to be one of the kind of guest skeptics to comment on these cases. In fact, we've got a series out now with American cases. They've just recorded a new series with American cases, so listen out for that, folks.
Nice.
And I kind of constantly am saying, look, it just doesn't follow. The definition of a hallucination is something that you thought was really happening, but it wasn't. Nobody denies that hallucinations take place. Of course they do. We know they do,
Gotcha.
But whenever you're dealing with someone's personal encounters, in terms of persuading them, try not to be confrontational. Try to say, well, okay, it might be that, but have you thought maybe it's this thing, I love it when people get in touch with me to describe their ghostly encounter. I think that is just classic sleep paralysis. And I can send them scientific papers on sleep paralysis, so they know it's a thing, but
right.
Yeah.
And then you also learn that maybe a particular brand of vodka before bed, not a great idea, but this is a very personal experience. There was a couple of things I wanted to, we're hitting right at the top of the hour, but there are two questions I definitely want to get to. So I hope you have a moment or two
Sure.
to stay with us. Paul wants to know, how do hypnotizable and non-hypnotizable people differ?
Right. Okay. I'll try and give a very concise answer.
Okay.
Mainly in terms of imaginative ability. If you've got a very, very good imagination, you are likely to be a very good hypnotic subject.
Ooh, so
And
Stephen King.
it also relates to suggestibility and all of those kind of things as well. So some people are able to have got such powerful imaginations that they're able to kind of think themselves into thinking that things are happening when maybe they really aren't. Others have less imagination and can't do that. You know, one group is
Got it.
hypnotizable, the other group isn't.
And Stephen, I see you here. I definitely wanted to ask your question. His question to you is, you mentioned that Skeptical Inquirer magazine, you mentioned it in your book. And how did the magazine influence your development as a skeptical thinker? Not so subtle plug.
Hey, enormously. I mean, as I've kind of constantly retold this story, it was reading James Alcock's book that turned me into a skeptic.
Mhm.
And James Alcock has done a lovely review of my book in the latest edition of Skeptical Inquirer, which I really do appreciate. And it's nice now to kind of think that, yeah, that book had such a huge influence on me. His book was called Parapsychology, Science or Magic. I'd never heard of the Skeptical Inquirer before I read his book, and there were loads of references there. I became a subscriber. I read it from cover to cover, and yes, it had a huge influence on me. Yeah.
Thank you. And once again, everyone, if you have get this edition of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, the abridged interview is in the magazine, and you can read the longer one online. But as I mentioned to you off camera, what I particularly loved was your compassionate approach. You know, if we are truly being skeptical, like, okay, we don't know every single thing, and so many people believe that they've had an experience. How do we not address that belief? How do we not then study that? So thank you. I'm always looking for the compassionate way in when we can, before, pitchforks at the gate, so to speak. But Chris, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas. And I just want to remind everyone here that if you have missed any of this and you want to go back, you absolutely can. This is being recorded and will probably be up tomorrow. And I'll be at skepticalinquirer.org for you to rewatch and share. And as always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, and of course to all of you in the audience. I'm so glad we had this time together. My name is Leanne Lord. Thank you. Good night. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you.
night to you as
Take
well.
care.